we can tell the audience categorically that not one of these things has ever been shown to meet the description of a virus, and that's an infectious particle that causes disease by its action as an intracellular parasite. They simply do not have any of that.
Thanks to Dr. Sam Bailey and Dr. Mark Bailey. Thanks for joining me today. You're doing some really great stuff, and your book is called The Final Pandemic, which we're going to briefly talk about. But can you flash that up and how you doing? Good evening to you both. Here we are.
We're
That's the book.
doing great. Yep. Thank you, John. And it's been amazing because we launched the book a couple of months ago. And of course, we don't get promoted by any of the mainstream platforms. In fact, they try and suppress everything we do. And our book actually made it to number 77 of all books on Amazon for
No
about
way.
24 hours. So we were up against everything. We even got above Dr. Zeus, I think,
It
for
was so exciting. We're like, Dr. Zeus.
so that was really
That's
special,
incredible.
and we hit
Yeah.
we hit number one in about three categories, and so no, it was we got such great support for the book, and it's still going strong. So yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, could you just hold up a bit longer? And what I'll do is I want everyone to buy a copy of this, okay? Because this is absolute paradigm shifting stuff. Would you like to explain the kind of the main themes of this and break it down for our audience a little bit?
Yeah, well, I guess really, I thought there was another book called Virus Mania that I was involved with, which was basically looking at all the different viral pandemics that have happened previously. So things like SARS and swine flu and avian flu and things. And a good friend of ours he's a sports scientist, but he's also hugely well known because of nutrition, Professor Tim Noakes. He's a South African based esteemed
Mm.
doctor, and he read the book. He read Virus Mania, and he said to me, Sam, the book's fantastic, but it's hard going in terms of there's a lot of references. It's a heavier book, like so much information that it can sometimes be off-putting to people.
Yeah.
And he said maybe you could write like a bridge, like a book that would be an introduction for people who are new to this. And so that's kind of where the idea for the final pandemic came. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, John, because it was so topical, because everyone had heard of COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. Tim said, look, this is the time to strike, basically, because the public are seeing it in real time.
Mm.
Because with books like Virus Mania, they exposed the fraud behind, HIV, SARS-1, avian flu, all the ones Sam was talking about there. But for a lot of people, that was decades ago, and it's not in the news so much these days. So the idea was perfect opportunity, like, because
Mm.
everyone can remember these headlines, and we put them in the book, the headlines from The Guardian and The Washington Post, and we get people to re-examine them, and we talk about the science behind what they were saying. And a lot of people were saying, oh my goodness, it's crazy what they were telling us in 2020, this whole situation. And it's really just bridging that gap to help people understand that there's so much fraud going on here with and these so-called infectious diseases and viruses and vaccines and pharmaceuticals that they're bringing out, etc. And really just trying to, it's a coffee table book essentially.
Yeah.
It's about 240 pages. It's not too daunting. And if the reader wants to go deeper, we've provided, 400 references there for people if they
Mm.
want to go deeper into it.
Yeah, great. And so the basic theme for people here is that we've been living in a bubble of deception. We believe that diseases are caused by contagion. Just to break it down for people a little bit, viral contagion, and that's been like the dominant paradigm for I don't know how long, right? And then we're saying now that actually you can't catch these things. This isn't something you pass on from person to person. This is something that you pick up within your environment, the toxicity of your environment, whether it be what you're eating, the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, right? That's the kind of the shift we're making. I mean, I don't know. For me, 2020, I'm going to call it clown vid just for the YouTube algorithms here because we got to be careful here because otherwise I get the video. You know what it's like, Sam, with the videos and stuff. So during clown vid, that was a huge wake up for me. I think for a lot of people, I think these events on some level, they actually waken a lot of people up. The darkness of it actually wakens a lot of people up. I've now completely changed my mind about it all. I now see that you can't catch a cold, can't you? And that was actually one of the chapters, I think, in your book. And I know our friend Daniel Reuters has written a book about that as well. But to break it down for the audience a little bit better than I can here, what does this mean, germs versus terrain theory? And how can we be sure that we're actually really looking at terrain theory and not a contagion, a viral contagion here?
Yeah, well, there's a few different elements there. And one is the concept of germs. So this is, first of all, there were microbes that do exist. So this is bacteria and fungal cells, etc. And around the late 1800s, that became this paradigm. And there are various reasons for why it became the dominant paradigm, and they're not good reasons. But anyway, initially it was thought, okay, well, when people have pneumonia or when they have a skin abscess, the doctors were finding bacteria present, and therefore they concluded they must be the cause of the problem because we keep finding them there. There were so many problems with that theory, and one was that the bacteria are usually found anyway, just in smaller numbers. So you can find them in the lungs and on the skin, etc. They're always present. In fact, on our bodies, there's more microbial cells than human cells on and in our body at normal times. So to claim that they're the disease-causing entities is just, it's completely bogus right from the start. But anyway, that was the paradigm that developed. And we always point out to people that the association of microbes does not mean that they cause the problem. An analogy might be people claiming that firemen are causing fires because they keep seeing these guys at the fires every time they turn up, and you know, they must be causing the fires. But you know, we know logically that the firemen are there once the fire develops, and they come along and put it out. So similarly with the microbes, they're always around and they will proliferate, meaning they'll breed and you know, increase in numbers and become metabolically more active when they're exposed to a changing terrain, which on us could be devitalized or dying tissue. So they're just doing what they're supposed to do. So that was sort of the start of the whole thing. And then with some diseases, they couldn't see any of these microbes with their light microscopes. You know, they're taking the samples and they're going, oh, it doesn't seem to be any particular bacteria here. You know, these were conditions like, say, influenza, where they were finding just so many different bugs, you know, all different bacteria, that they couldn't work it out. And they thought there must be something else at play. There must be some invisible contagion that we can't see. And initially they talked about fluid contagion and proteins being infectious, all this kind of thing. And none of those theories worked out for them. So, and then they developed the virus theory. So this was their model, that there were these particles which could not be seen on the light microscope. And to cut a long story short, in the 1930s, they developed the electron microscope, and this thing could see down to the nanoscale. And they concluded, right, we're going to find our viruses now. So they started taking the tissue from sick people and putting it under the electron microscope. No different than other tissue. They couldn't see any particular infectious particles in there. So the theory should have been completely, you know, bunk at that stage. And it wasn't until later they developed other techniques like the cell culture and antibodies and genomics and all that kind of stuff further down the track, which none of them are direct evidence. They all rely on inferences and imaginations. But so that was really the whole thing about how this developed. And I mean, the crazy thing was, you can look back in the 1800s and early 1900s, and there were lots of people speaking out against it, saying this is not how biology works. You know, we had Béchamp, and we had Montague Leveson, and we had others in New Zealand like Dr. Ulrich Williams, who were all saying this is not how it works. The bugs are not causing the diseases; they're just an association. But because, you know, and we talk about this in the book, who does this benefit? It benefits the pharmaceutical industry, it benefits the medical industry, it benefits political entities. all of the corporations who get involved with the pandemic industry. So there's a good reason. Well, it's a bad reason, but for them, it's a good reason why this whole thing gets sustained and why this model has persisted to this day. And for Sam and I, that's how we were trained. We were trained that microbes cause disease, and we were told this is a specific disease, it's caused by a specific microbe, and here's the vaccine, and here's the antibiotic, etc. And yeah, it's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's paradigm shifting stuff because, like you said, it's the pharma industrial complex, isn't it? I mean, they wouldn't want it to change even if they knew it could. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Because I know people and they're very good people and they've got a lot of integrity, but they still completely believe in that world, you know. And they think that, you know, when they're looking at a microscope of a virus, they think that that's the kind of the pathogen, the kind of the bad, you know, microbe, right? What would you say to them then? Because what are they looking at through that microscope? Are you saying it's just, is it an exosome, or what, you know, is it just a healthy part of the body? Is it a natural expression of the body trying to heal itself? Like, what is that they're looking at? What could you tell these people?
We don't really know what it is they're looking at. They're looking at some dead tissue. Like, that's the problem, is that it's just pointing arrows to things and saying, this is what we think it is.
Right.
Yeah, I think firstly, John, people should. Sam's got a great video called Unidentified Viral Objects and Electron Microscopy. People should watch that to see how preposterous this whole thing is. But in summary, what they're looking at is a piece of tissue, and you have to know how it was obtained. Like, how did they do this? Was it one of their cell culture procedures? In which case, you've got to understand what they do to the cells leading up to that point. Then they dehydrate the tissue, they expose it to various chemicals, they embed the whole thing in resin, and then they slice it very thinly. They're looking at the remains of dead tissue, whether it's you know, from an environmental sample or often from a cell culture sample. Now, you can't make deductions from that about living biology. So some of the features may even be artifact. They may not even be present in living biology. But when they say, so what you're talking about is those kind of things, those round things with a few spikies on them sometimes, and they say an arrow going to it and saying, this is SARS-CoV-2 or this is Ebola. But the reality is that you have to look at what their experiment actually did. And you'll find they never showed that that particle was infectious. They never showed what the composition of that particle was, like, you know, what material was inside it. And they certainly never showed that that was the cause of any disease in anything. So all of that is just made up stories around it. And I know it's so, this is what we get all the time is, funnily enough, I wrote a refutation of the virus model, 29,000 words specifically refuting all of the elements of the virus model. And some people would send us these CGI, you know, computer generated images of SARS-CoV-2 saying, but what's this? And you're like, it's really hard because of all that propaganda out there that people are shown those pictures and they're told this is what a virus looks like. But we can tell the audience categorically that not one of these things has ever been shown to meet the description of a virus, and that's an infectious particle that causes disease by its action as an intracellular parasite. They simply do not have any of that.
Yeah, because I know Kaufman talks about how they're actually exosomes, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of them could be.
Do you kind of go along that way of thinking? And exosomes just being, I guess, parts of the body that are trying to actually clean out the body, maybe remove the toxins. It's almost like the body's kind of garbage man, you know, the team that kind of clears things out. And you're looking at that, and we're actually looking at the cure, but we're seeing it as the cause of something nasty.
Definitely, but I think as Sam was saying earlier, we sometimes would just say we don't know what they are, because to make those you know, claims about living biology from electron microscopy is very difficult. We're looking at dead tissue embedded in resin. We don't know if this looks like living tissue, and there's a high chance that it doesn't. That you know, what we're seeing is a misrepresentation.
I really like what our friend Val Turner, who's he is a doctor, was a doctor and based in Australia from part of the Perth group, which were important in exposing HIV and the problems with HIV as the cause of AIDS. And Val says, imagine that you're in a spaceship above the Australian outback and you take a photo and you're looking down and you see a tree and you zoom in very, strongly, and then and you say, does that represent the Australian outback? What is that if you don't know what a tree is? It's this whole thing of what are you looking at? We think we know what we're looking at because someone's told us that this is an exosome or this is what, this is how this works, but we don't even know that. That's the reality of it. And I think trying to attribute meaning to these images is pointless because it doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah, our position would be you can't really determine much from an electron micrograph image with regard to living biology because it's a static image. And, this is different than light microscopy.
Yeah.
Because with a light microscope, we could watch, say, some E. coli, some bacteria in the dish, and we could see them divide. We could see movement, all that kind of stuff.
You can isolate them.
Them, characterize them, etc. All of those things can be done.
Yeah.
But when we move to that realm of electron microscopy, it's guesswork. And we've traced this back to the 1930s, particularly through the 60s, where they were doing a lot of this stuff and photographing what they thought were viruses. But you look at their methodology. So, for instance, 1968, the first time they thought they saw a coronavirus. Now, what happened was they were doing experiments in the Common Cold Unit in the United Kingdom, and they weren't really getting anywhere. And Daniel Reuters talks about this extensively in his new book, about why you can't catch colds. But anyway, what they did was the virologist there, David Terrell, he just used to go around collecting snot in these little test tubes. So people would just blow some snot into the test tube. And then he'd write on the side of the test tube, isolated virus, when all he had was snot, basically. And so that was a fraud right there, using the word isolated with these viruses when they'd done nothing of the sort. They didn't know what was in the snot. In 1968, he takes one of these snot samples and gives it to the Scottish electron microscopist, June Almeida, and says to June, we've got a virus in here. Can you find it? And she's never seen one before. So she's kind of like, well, what am I looking for? Well, and they're going, it must be small, like real small. And other than that, maybe round, I guess, could be round. And so June goes to work earnestly, and she's scanning around it's like looking around the Australian outback, basically, looking for a place to hone in on. And then she hones in on this little, what appears to be this round particle with a corona, like a crown around it. And they declare that as a coronavirus, and they publish it in Nature magazine. And that's it, John. Since that time, that's what everybody thinks they're looking at. And I mean, we just keep telling people, please go back to see what they did and how farcical this was. Someone blows snot onto the microscope, and then they go, oh, this must be the virus in there. And no, nothing was shown to be contagious or disease causing. So I think it's really important that. And of course, when we were trained as doctors, we knew none of that. Yeah. This was all hidden stuff. All of these experiments were not explained to us. Yeah. We were given textbooks that just said, here are the diseases. Yeah. Here's the photograph of the virus. Here's the vaccine. Respiratory illnesses are caused by respiratory viruses. Like these facts that you learn and you just assume that this is correct, because why would they be telling you something that's not correct?
Yeah, it's funny because in preparation of this, I spoke to my friend whose sister is a geneticist, and her husband is like, big senior doctor and stuff. And I mentioned this to him, and he immediately had that knee-jerk reaction saying, oh, no, that's all, BS and all that kind of stuff. And we had about an hour-long conversation about it. And I was trying to say that, is it not the case that, you go through the education and there's certain axioms that you don't question. There's fundamentals that you read and you learn and you take as true, 100% true, because why would they lie? Why would they say that to you? And so that paradigm is built on those accepted axioms within that paradigm, right? And so it's very difficult after about 10, 20 years to then go back and go, hang on a minute, maybe, actually, those fundamentals that we accepted right at the beginning should be questioned because you've built a whole career on it. Is that how it actually works? And is that why it kind of befuddles a lot of the people within that field?
Definitely, it's dogma.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
unquestioned. You cannot question it. Otherwise, you are exited from the system. I mean, we used to believe in this, and that's what is sometimes hard. Is that when you're talking to other doctors or scientists or people that work, and it's because you're basically saying that what you're doing is.
Mm.
Yeah, I think to give you an idea, John, of how bad it is, it was around in 2021, I ran into an old colleague just by chance on the street. And you could see he was really awkward straight away and didn't really want to talk about what was happening, this whole COVID situation. And he said, "Oh, I've heard Sam's, made some videos and has been that's really good that you guys have got something you're doing there, speaking out."
Mm.
And I said to him, "Do you think there's a pandemic on?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want to talk about this." And he said, "Yep, but I think there is." And I said, "Well, what's the definition of COVID-19 in your understanding? What did the WHO say defines a case?" And he said, "I don't know."
Mm.
Well, I said, "Well, how do you know there's a pandemic?" And he said, "Well, that's what the news was saying and other people are saying." And I said, "Do you know, say, at this stage they were just using PCR." And I said, "Do you know how it works? Like can you tell me in your own words any of the process?" And he said, "No, I don't know it." And I said, "Well, do you think you should look into this stuff before you start drawing conclusions, or why you think Sam and I are doing something strange?" And he said, "No, I don't see any need to look into this." I said, "We've got experts who deal with all this kind of stuff. It's not up to me to tell them what to do, and I do my job and they do their job." And he just he ended up just walking off. He didn't even want to discuss the most basic things. And we find this with pretty much all doctors who are in the system. They've got some sort of cognitive block where they can't go down this road because I think they know it will unravel
Yeah.
virtually their entire world, basically, with diagnostics, with therapeutics, with what they've told patients, with how they've made, like you say, with how they're making a living, how they've made a lot of money, potentially how much damage that they've done to people,
Yeah.
and they just don't want to know about it. So
Mm.
it's easier for them just to have just to say, "Look, this must be wacko stuff and I don't need to look into it."
But also, I think on a simpler
Mm.
version, it's for them, they have certainty. This is a certain thing.
Yeah.
Viruses exist and cause disease. And if you have certainty, you don't question. That's the whole problem is I mean, the reason that we started thinking about it was because we could see that things didn't make sense. You could see it with your own eyes. You're like, there's a pandemic apparently, but I walk out like nothing's happening. It
Mm.
just seems
Mm.
like people are acting crazy right now. And
Yeah.
that's all I could see. It was just fear and psychological problems on a huge scale.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah,
psychological
I'd say,
pandemic. It was a psychological pandemic in terms of people being, under mass formation psychosis. That was the real, kind of groupthink kind of psychosis, wasn't it? The way that people were just completely bought into everything without critically thinking.
yeah, well, I mean, whatever you want to call it, the problem
Mm.
was that people were not investigating anything for
Mm.
themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we tell people, do not outsource yourself,
Yes.
outsource your own health. Don't do it to a GP or a specialist. Don't do it to us. It's a
Yes.
big mistake. Take on board information and see if this makes sense to you. Try it out for yourself, etc. I mean, the medical system will tell you not to do that. They say, do not do your own research, all this kind of stuff, and which is absolutely crazy because we need people looking into the stuff. The more people, the better.
Yeah.
And then we just keep working things out. But
Yeah.
no, I think, I mean, it's so obvious that, like, for instance, take something basic like vaccines. You will pretty much in every country in the world, you can't be a practicing doctor and publicly criticize vaccines. You'll lose your license, essentially. they'll put you through the ringer. They'll investigate you, fine you, all that kind of stuff, do smear articles. So I mean, this is a real problem. The system is so corrupt now. It's you just cannot trust it at all. And these medical councils essentially are just extensions of the pharmaceutical industry, enforcing dogma. And any doctors who decide that they're going to do their own research face the penalty of being struck off or pushed out of the profession. Now, some doctors like us, we left on our own terms, because I left in 2016, Sam left in 2021, because our own research led us to believe that it wasn't helpful what we were doing. We were not able to help the public within that paradigm, and it was potentially just doing more harm than good. So we elected to step away from it, and now we talk directly to the public. And people ask us, or could you recommend a good doctor in the system? And we can't, because they're all compromised essentially. And if people didn't see that with COVID-19, just how compromised their doctors are, with the fact that they couldn't say anything outside of what the government and what the medical councils were saying.
Yeah. Can I ask them, because I know we're going to have to, these are kind of tired questions for you, because I know we kind of maybe gone over this before, but what do you think, was causing, people were getting ill, or were they not, during the clown vid period? And what was that? Do you believe that was actually, there were pathogens in the environment? And, because obviously we had the bat story, the bat soup, and then there was like the lab leak story, which I think was a way to kind of capture the truthers again and ring fence them, because they were starting to go into this idea of there is no such thing as a virus. So I feel like that kind of brought them back into the narrative a little bit. What's your opinion on that? And like, what was actually in the environment that was causing people to be sick, or were they not being sick? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly what you said was, right. I think there had to be these other established narratives to capture people back in who are questioning things, because the bat story by itself sounds totally crazy.
Actually crazy.
Well, you think, okay, that makes no sense even for someone that doesn't really understand anything. But I think it's always this thing of what is it? If you've taken people getting sick, say it wasn't 2020, say it was 2010, what do people get sick with then? There's no change in anything. It's what they did is reclassify common symptoms and called it one thing. And all they had was a new test that went around the world. And I do think there was psychological warfare being put on all of us, across the world, and putting it under lockdowns, isolating people, that is going to cause people to get sick, regardless of who you are. So I don't think there was anything new. It was just a reclassification of,
and we have to, if we're talking specifics, there were things that happened, like in the UK, there were a lot of deaths associated with rest homes and elderly people. And I think, there's been investigations into that, and some of these protocols that they were using were absolutely disgraceful, basically. Yeah. And also, these fear campaigns, I mean, they always hit the most vulnerable in the community. So when there's a tense situation going on, 24-hour-a-day fear being driven by the government and the media, for the most vulnerable in the population, that can be a death sentence, basically, when they're barely holding on to life anyway. So with all of the things, we've actually done, and our colleagues have done, detailed analyses of New York and Italy. Sam's got a video about what happened in Italy to explain that situation, etc., because there are always other much more straightforward explanations than this one that they tried to produce, saying that there was a virus. Now, you mentioned the word pathogen, and our research would indicate pathogens are not a thing. So by definition, a pathogen has to be a replicating entity, like some sort of microbe, essentially, and like bacteria or imagined viruses, etc. And it has to be able to cause disease and, pass around into a population. So what we did is we just went back through and we researched all of these alleged infectious diseases, looking at the foundational science, and could not find one study to back up anything that would show one of these microbes causing disease or passing around and causing disease, etc. It just does not exist.
It's not how the body works. Yeah.
So, but it gets confusing because sometimes people, when they talk about pathogens, they're actually talking about other things like chemical poisoning, etc. But we have to be very specific here. It's like when they use the word bioweapon. Bioweapon's not a poison, or it's not something that's like a pharmaceutical, etc. What it is specifically is a replicating entity. So it's got to be like some sort of living or semi-living entity that passes around a population. And as I say, we look at all the foundational science. We don't get distracted with all epidemiology, and stuff can be completely misleading. It can give you a hypothesis, but that's not where you get scientific evidence from. You have to just start at that point and then go to the foundational science. And the foundational science simply isn't there. So as Sam says, people get sick for all different reasons. We used examples like Australia, where in the COVID era, they went from about 2,300, 2,400 deaths from flu each year to 0. We can't even believe they published these figures. But they just put it out in the open and said, "Oh,
so
yeah,
flagrant, aren't they? They're so blatant."
And we were like, "Oh." Yeah. So one of Sam's videos, she made a chart just showing it, saying this is what they officially said, was that influenza in Australia killed nobody once COVID arrived. And wouldn't that suggest, well, maybe they just reclassified something here? So yeah, there's a lot of things going on, and people want to get tied up in excess mortality and all that kind of stuff, but that can only tell you so much. I mean, we're far less interested in those types of things because our job is to look at foundational science. Do viruses exist? Do pathogens, are they real? Can microbes cause disease? And we find the answer to all of these things is no. It's irrefutable.
I mean, thank you for that. Do you think, though, that there's any like bacterial contagion? I mean, when people are picking things up that way, or are we just saying the kind of viral contagion person to person is not really happening? I mean, or food poisoning or something. There is a contagion of sorts going on there, right? Do you still go along with that or not?
Well, no, food poisoning's different because that is something where, say you're at a table of 10 people, and 5 people eat the chicken and 5 people eat the beef, and then 5 of them get sick. You'd say that there was a problem, with the chicken. So the chicken may have been incorrectly handled. Maybe it was left in the sun for a couple of days. It started to break down. Now, when biological material breaks down, it becomes toxic to us. Usually we can smell it, and it smells rotten to us. If it's cooked, it can kind of hide it, and you can get food poisoning in that situation. There are also breakdown products that bacteria will produce, like anything from meats to cereals and stuff. And once they start doing that breakdown, then yes, potentially you've got toxins. So, but that's not an infection because it's not passing from one person to the next. And as I say, we study foundational science, and we look for, I mean, we've looked into these really tricky ones too, like what they claim are sexually transmitted diseases.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that was my next one.
Yeah, that's, I anticipated this. I could see that's what you wanted to ask.
Open book.
Shall I ask these doctors?
Yeah, I'll work my way up from food poisoning to HIV.
And the good thing is, John, is that Sam's already got videos on gonorrhea and syphilis and stuff, and people can look at those. And we go back to the human experiments they did. They could never do these days. They did them in the old days. They got prisoners drunk, and they slept with prostitutes and all this kind of stuff. And they tried to get them to pick up these diseases. They virtually couldn't do it. And what they ended up doing was things like, I don't want to get your channel in trouble here, but they got sandpaper on the private parts and, roughed things up a bit, and then added the biological material and said, hey, look at this. This is all red and raw. It must be an infectious disease. And we just look at it and say, well, if you get sandpaper on your private parts, it's going to hurt. It's going to really hurt. And potentially you will get these reactions. So, no, again, we didn't find, and we found it very misleading. Like, we've called out the CDC on things like this, where they've published information saying that these are contagious diseases, and they link the studies But we look at those studies and we say, well, that's very misleading what they reported there. They didn't actually show natural transmission. They only showed transmission through unusual routes, like injecting things directly into people or scarifying their genitals with needles and things like that. So that's not something that happens in nature.
Really? So okay, I'm going to go there. What is causing AIDS then, if it's not HIV?
Yeah, so again, that was a multifactorial thing. So there was the first wave of people that had AIDS were, homosexual men. And at that time, they're living very unhealthy practices. So these are people that are basically partying all the time, taking a lot of drugs, taking things like poppers, which was as a very toxic carcinogen drug, and it was used because it made people feel good. It gave them euphoria, but also, and it could dilate the area where, back passage. So it did lots of different things. And so when these people were first kind of presented, these groups of homosexual men, and this is sort of in the Californian area, essentially they were just toxic and incredibly sick. And so they started them on medications which were even more toxic. So AZT, the actual medications themselves, were basically some of the reasons of why these people got sick. And so people have looked into this, and gone into this deeply, like the Perth group. And I would encourage people that are interested to look into this work further, because it's probably quite hard to discuss in a short.
Yeah, and I think what's important too was that when they came up with this syndrome, these were not new diseases.
No.
Okay, so we had things like Kaposi sarcoma and lymphoma. These were already in existence. Okay, and they just decided once again to do this reclassification. So previously you'd have someone who you'd just say they've got lymphoma. But now, if it was a gay man presented and they had this new antibody test which came out and in the 1980s, so they'd do the HIV antibody test. Oh, you got lymphoma. Then they'd say you've got AIDS, even though the week before they had the test, it was called lymphoma. So this was a huge reclassification thing. So that was, and there's now more than 24 so-called AIDS-defining conditions, diseases. But all of these diseases existed prior to the introduction of the term AIDS. Okay, so this is one of the chapters in our book is called Allopathic Medicine Invents Disease, which it's like their specialty. It's like, there's new stuff coming out all the time. Apparently, now we have tens of thousands of diseases, and they'll just keep going, more and more and more diseases. Wow. And AIDS. So something you'll see which is really disingenuous is people will describe us as being AIDS denialists when nobody's denying that there's a syndrome of sick people and they call it AIDS. What the dispute is over is about the cause of why they got sick. And with the establishment, they say that there was this new virus that came about and that caused everyone to get AIDS. But there's no evidence at all in the basic science literature to show that is what is the reality. It just simply doesn't exist, this particle that they're talking about. Now, as Sam says, the Perth group did a 65,000 word refutation. It's absolutely flawless refutation of the entire model. None of the scientific journals will publish it. They're all just will not touch it. In general, people won't talk about it in the AIDS, HIV establishment because they know it is so devastating to the entire theory. And you'll see all these inconsistencies that come up. Like Sam did a video, was it 2021, about the University of Queensland in Australia were trying to make a COVID vaccine, right? And they were scrambling to be one of the first in the world. But they had a little problem with it, and all of the recipients developed HIV antibodies, okay? Every single one. And that's interesting because in Australia, once you have HIV antibodies on more than a couple of occasions, you're supposed to have HIV. You've got AIDS now. But they said, no, these participants, they don't have HIV. They've just got the antibodies. But hang on a minute. The people that came up with this whole HIV thing, AIDS thing, said that the antibodies are specific to HIV, so you can't get them unless you. So then there's all these problems. So they're saying they don't have AIDS or HIV, but they do have the positive antibodies. Now, shouldn't that mean they're immune in their system? That by accident, haven't they discovered the miraculous HIV vaccine? But they said, no, they're not protected against HIV. So yeah, please don't go doing anything risky now. I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The problem for them was that what happened at the University of Queensland collapses the entire HIV AIDS theory. It just crumples in a heap with what happened. And that's why they quickly cover it up and pretend, there was no big deal. And just so many inconsistencies, how they have to keep this thing alive.
Do you think it's coming to the end of its cycle, or do you think it's going to go on for another 100 years? Like, what's your feeling on it? I mean, it feels as though we're reaching a little bit of critical mass with this, where it feels like there's a tipping point coming. But what's your feeling on it? I mean, do you sense that as well with the people you speak to, or do you still feel like we're kind of a tiny minority with all this?
It's a hard one to know. Like, I think there's definitely been a shift from 2020. Like, way more people are aware of these arguments now. And I mean, we see it just looking around at different sites and stuff, and you see your name mentioned and different things, like way more than before. And I don't care about that so much. I just care about the message getting out there more than anything. But I think this is critical to keep. I mean, to bring in biosecurity surveillance state, they need this. This is one of the arms of it. So I don't think they're going to let this go, like, in terms of it's carrying on and it's being used. And I think it will be used in more sinister ways, where they'll do things like testing wastewater and say we need to lock down because there's an outbreak of dengue or whatever they decide. And so this is why it's really important for people to realize that germs do not cause disease, that there's nothing to fear, because then you cannot be controlled.
I think, I think, John, we are getting to an interesting time here, and you could be right. There could be a critical mass. Way too many people are aware of this now. And what's interesting is that we talk to people who were, HIV dissidents back in the 80s and 90s. And they'd say, look, back then you'd have a meeting and 10 or 12 people would turn up, and that would be everyone in the world that knew it was a scam would be in that one room, at one time. And what they've said is amazing is that Sam's been publishing some of the Perth Group's work in video format. And that's getting hundreds of thousands of views, which is massive compared to the attention it was getting in the 1990s. So, we can see the metrics on our own website. There's increasing interest, etc., which is fantastic to see. Of course, we're up against extreme censorship. Now, we found out that in 2020, when Sam's channel really took off, one thing which got us instantly in trouble was talking about no virus, and pretty much that's why we've not been allowed on Facebook since 2020. Sam's kept her YouTube channel, but can't basically talk about any of these things.
It's on life support.
Yeah, I know. I kind of noticed your rebrand a little bit with it, the tweak. Yeah. Adapting.
So we have to go elsewhere, but to us that's kind of encouraging, because a lot of the work that we're doing is even the mainstream media won't do smear articles, because they tried it a couple of times, and with several people like Sam and Tom Cowan and stuff, and it just brings more attention, because people go, what, I've never heard of this, and what, viruses don't exist? This sounds interesting. We're finding, I think, what I'm really interested in is what's going to happen when this bubbles to the surface, because at the moment there's a lot of infighting in the freedom community. So you've got your people who say they're, in the freedom community and exposing the truth, but they're still sticking to virology and, mainstream paradigms and stuff like that. And they're kind of like the major, flack at this stage is coming from those sort of people. Whereas we're finding it's interesting because the mainstream, they won't go anywhere near us. Like, so here in New Zealand, for instance, they've been running a few smear articles against SAM since 2020. As I say, they tend not to do too many because we hope that they do, because it drives book sales really, really nicely every time they do. But something we've noticed, John, is that Sam and I have been doing this for years, but the media will never mention my name. They only ever mention Sam as though she's doing this by herself, and they don't mention the technical papers that I've written. So we think this is kind of interesting. We think it's probably a good thing that they don't want to go anywhere near this, and they are worried that the public are going to find out, and more people are going to catch on. And even this year, Sam's been contacted by people who were really deeply asleep, took 4 of the special medications, and have now said, oh my goodness, I've started watching what you guys are talking about, and it's making sense to me now, this whole thing. And to us, that's really encouraging that we're just reaching new people all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like the emperor with no clothes story a little bit. You know, people sort of, they know something's up with it. I don't know, I think that's your metaphor. I think I took that from you, Sam. I think I watched that in one of your videos, but it's that thing though, isn't it? It's sort of, we kind of all know that this is going on, but there's that thing where we don't want to, come out the box and talk about it. We don't want to be the outlier, really. And that is kind of a fear mechanism in place to stop people from, speaking up about this, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it is encouraging. It's so hard to predict, because the thing is too, we're in our world. And so it's when you're talking with normal people, and, you have to be careful because you just don't sort of know where people are. But I always like to point out to people, just if they can see another scam, if they can see other problems, like, what do you think about kind of climate change or 9/11? What do you think about that? And it's sort of just seeing where people are at. And I mean, what's interesting is there's always something. There's always people will see, oh yeah, that doesn't really make sense. But I mean, I personally feel like doctors and things are just, they're lost causes. Like,
I think
I don't think you waste time talking to them.
We find that, and because people want us to speak to institutions and doctors groups and stuff, and it's a complete waste of time because they write you off beforehand, and most of them will just block you from speaking, etc. So I mean, we found, like, years ago, we just go directly to the public and tell them, and it's amazing because there's so many people in the public that get it. They study it, they pay attention, they look into it, and they say, I totally get this. And
one thing I was going to say, actually, that you made me think was that we have noticed more recently is that members of the public, they're so schooled up on this stuff now, and the arguments, they really get it. And then they go and they'll approach members of institutions, virologists, and they'll confront them about these things, like doctors in hospitals or other, like, people on a plane wearing a mask who's a scientist and understands molecular biology, and they'll really get into these discussions. That's what I think is great, is seeing that happen, where that people are getting far more confident and understanding why this is a fraud. It's not just some like whim that people are saying because they don't like what's happened. This is real. This is big, based on years of work.
I think too, a couple of years ago, Sam interviewed Jim West, who's a veteran investigative journalist and researcher. He exposed a lot of the polio scam, a lot of the problems with the insecticides like DDT, a lot of the charts people might have seen produced by Jim West. And anyway, Jim said to Sam, it was quite interesting because he said 20 years ago, he didn't hear anyone talking about the stuff, but he said, a couple of years ago when he did the interview, he'd just been in a bar somewhere, and he just heard down the end of the bar someone saying, that viruses don't exist though, and the other person said, yeah, of course. And Jim was like, couldn't believe it. He thought, isn't this fantastic? He said 20 years ago you would not hear that conversation in a bar, and we're finding it's definitely reaching more quarters. But I mean, we don't underestimate the censorship that we're up against here, and the shadow banning, etc., is absolutely enormous, because I think they worked out that the fact checks and the smear articles didn't work at all. they just drove more traffic into this arena. So I think now they've moved to the shadow ban and just demonetizing, deplatforming people, just completely suppressing people who are looking for the content.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm kind of noticing that a little bit as well. So, I guess that's the struggle for us, isn't it? We have to diversify our stuff to go on different channels and the alternative channels, and we have to kind of do it that way, don't we? And we shouldn't really rely on these YouTubes anyway. I mean, we should be kind of building our own platforms and trying to do it our own way. But I was going to say is before we finish off and you hold the book up again, I've got something fun I want to do. I just want to do a real quick fire one, so you can give me just like couple of seconds, 10 seconds on each one, right? That's all right. So ivermectin, what the hell is that about? Does it work? What was the point?
Total waste of time. Sam just released a video in the last 24 hours. People should watch that.
Okay.
I'm sorry to the people out there, but it was a alternative permitted narrative, one of the gaslights, and unfortunately it did scam a lot of people.
Yeah, scammed me, unfortunately. And hydroxychloroquine, I think I said that right. Same sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and that also had other nefarious purposes where they gave extremely high doses to people, caused VF cardiac arrests, to kind of to say drive people towards the other treatment options that like 99% of people wanted to take. But yeah, that those studies were, so it had multifactorial reasons there.
But here's our tip for everyone. Don't put chemicals in your body.
Yeah, don't try and treat issues by putting more chemicals in. I think that's the kind of the baseline, isn't it, for health? Okay, next one. Shedding, is it real or not?
No.
No. Again, yeah, you guys covered it in Virus Mania. It's based on a lot of it's based on the prion stuff as well, this hypothesis that you can have an infectious particle. This whole thing was given a Nobel Prize. It was a total scandal. They never showed that there were infectious proteins. And shedding again is it's a fair narrative. And please, people, don't buy into it.
Yeah.
So we're saying from the JAB, right? We're saying from that no shedding, because that was something in the truth community that I was being told about, be careful. Why do you think that would just create fear and stop people kind of getting close together again?
Yes, and it buys back into germ theory. It's really important because it's the same concept of what they say about viruses.
That there are contagious particles that come off one person and go into another.
Okay, fair enough. Graphene oxide, real or not?
Hard to say. We had our microscopist here in New Zealand, a good friend of ours, Robin Wakeling. He's published a paper, so people can check that out on Sam's website. And essentially, we found it very difficult to determine what's in the vaccine vials. And your co-author, Stefano, he disputes the existence of graphene oxide. He calls it a theoretical kind of molecule rather than a proven to exist one. So yeah, I think, John, our position is it's a waste of time going down that route, because you just you get nowhere with it. And people shouldn't be injecting things into bodies anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Final one then. The Wuhan drop. Do we all remember this? The videos of people dropping dead on the street and all that. Do you remember? That was the very first part of the whole propaganda, wasn't it? I think. And then it went into like the mannequins and stuff in New York and all that kind of stuff. What do you think was causing the Wuhan drop?
Well, we talk about this in the book.
It's actually in the book.
Okay, all right. There we go. Perfect timing. All right, so plug the book, guys. Plug the book, and maybe if you can mention the Wuhan drop.
So we feature some of the preposterous headlines that and the Wuhan drop is in there.
Yeah,
we have the man lying perfectly supine on the sidewalk with his arms right beside him,
with his mask,
and then we've got two people in sneakers and hazmat suits turning up and looking at the camera for the photo opportunity.
It's very real.
And we're just pointing out to people that you might want to be careful about believing these kind of images where they don't come with any scientific information whatsoever. And so I know, and we call it the bait and switch in the book. So what we saw was these terrifying images from China, people dropping in the street, seemingly anyone, any age could be affected, etc. And then later on, it became you know, you've got to be really careful with this new disease because, you know, you would have probably had this where you live. We certainly had it in New Zealand. They said, you can't distinguish this thing from the common cold, you know. And we're like, well, that's interesting because you were saying that you could drop dead in the street at any time, and now you can't distinguish it from the common cold. So, yeah, that's we wrote a whole chapter on that called it the bait and switch, about how they drive this fear narrative into people and then later on swap it with something else and say that's why everyone's got it now.
And you just can't verify any of this information though. I mean, that's sorry, the shorthand version is like, how do you know people do collapse? Like people do faint and things like that, and you just have no idea about what you're seeing or the context of it. It's just, it's nonsense. And they just used it like the pictures of coffins and all that sort of stuff. It's fear narratives to make people think, oh my gosh, this is going to kill me. I need to listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fear indoctrination, isn't it? Which got everyone. That's the thing. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? That that if you had a sniffle, you were demonized and seen as a potential granny killer. If you had no symptoms at all, you were still seen as a threat, as an asymptomatic carrier. But yet people are dropping dead left, right, and center of heart issues, blood clots, you know, cardiac arrests, and it's almost completely. No one even cares anymore when they see it on the news or in a newspaper. It's just frightening, the conditioning, isn't it? I mean,
it is, and what's really sad is the people that keep going back to the abusers, basically. And you know, that's really hard for people to accept that they made some wrong choices, and the people they thought they trust, they shouldn't. And you know, particularly a lot of these public health officials and stuff, I mean, people just need to switch off the TVs and the radios, because you know, if they haven't worked out they've been hugely misled by now, they really need to get up to speed.
Absolutely.
And watch your show instead, John.
Yeah, come on, watch our show and yours as well. Yeah. How's your channel doing now, Sam? Anyway, because with the you know, the latest bands and stuff, are you still managing to ride it until the wheels come off, sort of thing, or not?
Yeah, I just use it for what it is, you know, like it's just a way of funneling people. I mean, it's so hard to get people to move off from YouTube, but at the same time, I'm grateful because it went crazy in 2020, and it kind of allowed me, you know, I didn't predict this. I didn't try and make it happen, if you know what I mean. It just did, and then and now it's sort of taken us into a much better path.
I think too, with the YouTube channel is still by far the biggest platform that Sam has, but to be honest, the other platforms, like the website's really strong, and Substack as well. So a lot of the audience who are really strong on this stuff have come over. And we're still encouraging people from YouTube to come over to the other platforms because
that's the dark side.
That's where they can watch all of the content, and it's a bit better too because you get the weekly updates with the emails, and we can let people know what we're up to, and there's a lot more we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't make a video like this, like you and me talking. Like even if I promote this on YouTube, it will cause problems for you. Like it's not good.
I know it's a treacherous ground to walk, isn't it? It's this difficult one to know how to play it, isn't it? But do you want to mention do you still want to mention your YouTube, your Odyssey, and also let's just say, how can they find the book? Do you want them to go to Amazon? Do you want them to go to your website?
Probably the best is come to my website, which is drsambailey.com. And you'll see there's a book section, and because some people might not like Amazon, it is on Amazon, and you can search for it there, The Final Pandemic. But it's also on Lulu Books, which is a kind of more independent group, and it's better for us if people get the book from there. But you know, whatever suits, because Amazon are very reliable with shipping and everything else. And the other places really, if you want to find me, are on Substack, which is again drsambailey. .substack.com. I am on Odyssey, but it's harder, you know, to really I mean, some people like Odyssey, some people don't. So I really come to me on drsambailey.com, and you'll find all the different places that I am, and can watch any of my content there. It's pretty much all of the stuff we do is for free.
Yeah. And Mark, what about you, mate? Are you can we plug you in any way?
Well, you know, I haven't earned my own website yet. So.
Slacker.
Yeah. It's well, what happened, I think what happened, John, is that in 2020 Sam just didn't know where this was going, and it rapidly developed into what it was, and I was in the background doing all the research and stuff, and Sam remains to this day. She's more the public face of what we do, and the people, they do like to see you, don't they? They you know, sometimes when it's just me turning up, you can see a little bit of disappointment, but you know, but
Get in
anyway,
there, Mark. Get in there. Come on, get in there.
Yeah.
But you know, by 2021, Sam was just overwhelmed with interviews and appearances. So that's when I started doing interviews, you know, publicly in 2021. But by then, you know, Sam had established it as Dr. Sam Bailey and stuff. So you know, I do have my little segment on the website, and
there we go.
And,
have a look. Yeah, on the website,
and we
guys.
we do twice a month question and answers when both of us are on camera, and we field questions from our audience, and we take all kinds of questions, and it's really cool.